They laughed at her $500 withdrawal, never imagining that the quiet woman before them held the key to billions and would forever change their world. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel as a sign of support. It was just past 10 a.m. on a Thursday when the automatic glass doors of Grand Harbor National Bank slid open, letting in a cool breeze that rustled the neatly organized pamphlets by the door. The branch was located in the upscale downtown district of Charleston, South Carolina, nestled between a boutique wine shop and a high-end fitness studio. Regulars in tailored suits and designer handbags came and went, greeted by smiling tellers and the subtle scent of brewed coffee from the bank's refreshment station. But on this particular morning, heads turned when a woman walked in, wearing faded jeans, a loose cardigan, and well-worn sneakers. Her silver gray hair was pulled into a low bun, and she carried a plain, oversized tote that looked more thrift store than Fifth Avenue. She moved with quiet confidence and stopped at the counter, patiently waiting her turn. Behind the teller's counter, Kayla, young, energetic, and fresh out of business school, nudged her colleague Tyler and whispered, "You think she's in the right place? Looks like she took a wrong turn from the bus station." Tyler chuckled under his breath, adjusting his tie. "Maybe she's here for coins. You know how some of them come in asking to cash in change." When the woman finally stepped forward, Kayla put on her brightest customer service smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" The woman placed her ID and a debit card on the counter and said, "I'd like to withdraw $500, please." Kayla glanced at the card and paused. The name read Eleanor M. Whitaker. Nothing about it rang any bells. She ran the card through the system and raised an eyebrow when the account balance flashed on the screen. She quickly turned the monitor away from view and cleared her throat. "Of course, ma'am," she said, suddenly more polite. "Just a moment." The transaction processed smoothly, and Eleanor collected the crisp bills and receipt without a word. She tucked them into a small envelope and dropped it into her tote. Then she looked up and said something no one expected. "Actually," Eleanor began, her voice calm but firm, "I'd like to schedule a meeting with your branch manager." "I have business to discuss." Kayla blinked. "Is there something wrong with your account?" "No," Eleanor replied, "but I'm planning to move $2 billion, and I'd like to know how your bank plans to assist with that." The room went dead silent. Tyler's mouth fell open. One of the regulars standing in line dropped her phone. Even the security guard leaned in. Kayla, now visibly flustered, stood straighter. Yes ma'am, absolutely. Let me get Mr. Clayton for you." As Eleanor waited, she glanced at the digital screen showing today's mortgage rates, her expression unreadable. The whispering had already started, but Eleanor didn't seem to notice. She had seen it all before, and this time, she was the one holding all the cards. Branch manager James Clayton was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for being direct. A 20-year veteran of banking, he had climbed the ladder with a mix of smooth talk and sharp numbers. His office was sleek, glass walls, cherrywood desk, and a mounted diploma from Duke that he made sure every visitor noticed. When Kayla buzzed him about a woman claiming she wanted to transfer $2 billion, James chuckled. "She wants what?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "She says she wants to move $2 billion. Eleanor Whitaker," Kayla replied, voice cautious now. "She just withdrew $500, but when I pulled up her account, sir, there's a lot in there." James leaned back in his chair, curiosity piqued. "All right, send her in." A few minutes later, Eleanor stepped into the office. She moved slowly, but there was no hesitation. James stood and extended his hand. "Ms. Whitaker, I'm James Clayton. I understand you have some business to discuss." Eleanor shook his hand with a firm grip. "Yes, I do." He gestured to a chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." Eleanor sat, setting her tote bag beside her. "I'm looking to relocate some funds, approximately $2 billion. I've had my assets spread across a few banks and investment firms, but recent management decisions at one of them forced my hand." James nodded, still skeptical. "I see. And you're considering consolidating that here at Grand Harbor?" "I am," Eleanor replied. "But before I make any moves, I want to know how you intend to handle that kind of responsibility." James smiled politely, trying not to let his disbelief show. It wasn't that $2 billion was impossible, just unheard of coming from someone dressed like a retiree on a Social Security budget. He glanced at her account on his screen and did a double take. Then another. Her checking account alone had mid-8 figures. His palms suddenly felt a little damp. "Ms. Whitaker, I apologize if I underestimated the seriousness of your visit," he said, adjusting his tie. "We can certainly accommodate high-value transfers and provide concierge-level financial services. I'd like to bring in our senior wealth advisor, if that's all right." Eleanor nodded. "Please do." As James stood to make the call, he glanced back toward the lobby. Kayla and Tyler were whispering by the teller stations, sneaking glances toward his office. They had no idea. Back in the chair, Eleanor watched James with a calm that unnerved him. She had been underestimated her entire life, because of her age, her clothes, her demeanor. What people didn't see was the empire she built from scratch. Tech patents, real estate, a chain of health clinics across 5 states. Quiet money, private power. James returned to his seat. "We'll have a private meeting room ready in 10 minutes. Would you like something to drink, Miss Whitaker?" "No, thank you," she said, folding her hands. "I'd just like to get to work." For the first time that day, James knew he wasn't in control of this meeting. Eleanor Whitaker was. The private conference room was tucked away behind frosted glass doors on the bank's top floor. It was reserved for VIP clients, typically reserved for corporate CEOs or old money families with generations of wealth. Rarely was it used, but today it gleamed under the spotlight of possibility. James escorted Eleanor into the room, walking a step behind now, his demeanor far more respectful than earlier. Waiting inside was Margaret Levine, Grand Harbor's senior wealth advisor. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, and known for handling some of the bank's wealthiest clients. "Ms. Whitaker," Margaret said, rising from her seat and extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Likewise," Eleanor replied. They all sat down, and Margaret opened a sleek black portfolio. "James mentioned you're interested in moving a significant amount of capital. Would you mind telling me a bit more about your plans?" Eleanor gave a small smile. "I'd like to move the funds gradually over the next 6 months. My goal is to restructure and centralize control under a new trust. I also need assistance managing the tax strategy and philanthropic disbursements." Margaret's pen froze mid-stroke. "Philanthropic?" "Yes. A good portion will go toward healthcare and education initiatives I'm funding. I've already established 3 foundations. Now it's time to scale." Margaret sat back, clearly impressed. "Do you have a portfolio manager assisting you now?" "I did, until last week. He decided my age meant I wasn't agile enough to make financial decisions, so I let him go." James winced. Margaret nodded slowly. "Understood." Eleanor reached into her tote and pulled out a thick folder. She slid it across the table. "This is the current breakdown, assets, accounts, and a detailed investment history." Margaret flipped through it, her eyes widening page after page. This wasn't wealth that had been handed down through inheritance. This was built. Smart tech investments from the early 2000s, real estate flips in up-and-coming cities, a stake in a biotech firm that just went public. There were decades of consistent, intelligent moves behind those numbers. "How did you get started?" Margaret asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor gave a small chuckle. "I started in a pharmacy, owned a few clinics by 30, invested in my first startup at 38, retired at 50, unofficially, but I never stopped working, just worked smarter." James sat back humbled. "Why now? Why move everything?" Eleanor's gaze was steady. "Because I'm not going to live forever, Mr. Clayton. I've built something that can change lives, but I need the right partners to carry it forward. Today wasn't a test of your bank's capacity. It was a test of how you treat people you think don't matter." The room fell quiet. Eleanor stood, collecting her bag. "I'll give you a week to prepare your proposal. After that, I'll choose between this bank and 2 others. But I'd like to believe this town still remembers how to treat its elders with dignity." With that, she walked out, leaving behind 2 bankers who just had their assumptions torn apart. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire through Grand Harbor National Bank. Every employee, from security guards to loan officers, had heard about the woman with $2 billion. The rumors ran wild. Some said she was a secret heiress. Others thought she won a government lawsuit, and a few swore she used to be some kind of underground tech mogul. Tyler, the young teller who had once joked about her, sat pale-faced in the break room, nursing his coffee like it was penance. "Did you see the account balance?" he whispered to Kayla. "It had more zeros than I've ever seen in my life." Kayla wasn't smiling anymore. "I called her poor, right to her face." "You didn't know," Tyler offered weakly. "I should have treated her like I treat everyone else." "That's the problem," she muttered, standing to head back to her station. Meanwhile, upstairs, James Clayton was scrambling. He had spent half the night poring over Eleanor Whitaker's file. What little of it they had. Everything matched up. Clean credit history, no red flags, multiple property holdings, and a staggering net worth that made her one of the wealthiest people to ever walk through their doors. Margaret Levine wasn't scrambling. She was planning. "James," she said, knocking once and stepping into his office, "I've begun drafting a wealth consolidation plan. But we need to be clear, this isn't just about money, it's about relationship management. Eleanor doesn't want a bank, she wants trust." James rubbed his temples. "We screwed that up already." "She hasn't walked away yet. That's a good sign. But we need to prepare. She'll be evaluating us just as sharply as we evaluate her." James nodded. "What do you know about her past?" Margaret hesitated. "I called a friend over at Charleston Medical. Apparently, Eleanor funded their free clinic back in 2015. Anonymously, she's donated to disaster relief centers in Savannah, hurricane recovery in Biloxi. Quiet money. She doesn't want fame, just results." James sat back, stunned. We nearly laughed her out of the lobby. Outside the office, Eleanor herself was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't returned a call or email since yesterday. But across town, at a small community center in North Charleston, she was quietly reviewing grant requests. She sat in a room filled with paper folders, sipping tea from a styrofoam cup, chatting with a social worker about mental health resources for teens. She didn't need to check on the bank. She already knew what would happen. She knew her presence had shaken the place, and she knew the real test was just beginning. At Grand Harbor, James called an emergency staff meeting. "No more judgment, no more assumptions. We treat every person who walks through those doors with the same respect we'd show a Fortune 500 CEO, he said firmly, "because one day they just might be." The staff nodded. Lesson learned, though it came at a heavy price. And back at the community center, Eleanor smiled to herself. Change, she knew, didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it started with a $500 withdrawal. By Monday morning, the tension inside Grand Harbor National was thick enough to cut with a knife. The entire upper management team had been pulled into weekend meetings to discuss Eleanor Whitaker's potential account transition. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about saving face, regaining trust, and winning over someone who could change the course of the bank's future. Margaret Levine, ever the professional, had spent the weekend crafting a personalized financial proposal tailored specifically to Eleanor's history and vision. It included a dedicated team of advisors, real-time portfolio transparency, automatic philanthropic fund routing, and a rotating advisory board that would ensure her money didn't just grow, but made an impact. James, still bruised by his own misjudgment, had taken a step back. He knew Eleanor wouldn't respond to slick language or bank jargon. She wanted authenticity. At precisely 9 a.m., Eleanor's name reappeared in the check-in system. The front desk receptionist blinked, then stood. "Good morning, Ms. Whitaker. We've been expecting you." Eleanor smiled slightly. "I hope that's a good thing." She was escorted upstairs to the same private room, but this time it had been changed. The sterile glass table was gone, replaced with a warmer wood finish. A small potted plant sat in the corner. The lights had been dimmed just enough to feel comfortable. It was subtle but intentional. Margaret greeted her with a genuine smile. "Ms. Whitaker, thank you for coming back. We've put together a proposal based on what you shared last week. No assumptions, no pretense, just respect for what you've built and what you want to build next." Eleanor took the thick binder and began flipping through it. Margaret didn't speak. She simply waited. 10 minutes passed. Then Eleanor set the binder down and met Margaret's eyes. "You actually listened," Margaret nodded. "I've worked with wealthy clients for years. but rarely with someone who's managed to stay out of the spotlight while doing more good than most charities combined. Eleanor chuckled. I learned early on that applause doesn't fund programs. James stepped into the room, more composed than before. Ms. Whitaker, I just wanted to apologize directly. I let my judgment cloud my professionalism. That won't happen again. Eleanor studied him. Apology accepted. Just remember, you never know who's standing across the counter. She stood and extended her hand. Let's begin. I'm ready to move phase 1, $600 million. Margaret blinked. Just like that? I've seen enough. The rest will follow if things go well. Within minutes, a flurry of activity began. Compliance officers were pulled in. Transfer documents were reviewed. Legal teams briefed. But amid all the chaos, Eleanor remained calm, seated with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Outside the glass, employees who had once dismissed her were now peeking in with awe. She wasn't just a client now. She was the biggest name their bank had ever seen. And she had chosen them. The first transfer went through within 24 hours. $600 million moved seamlessly into a newly created trust account at Grand Harbor National, triggering a cascade of internal alerts, security checks, and executive reviews. But everything had been executed with precision. Margaret Levine made sure of that. The buzz within the bank had transformed into something else: reverence. Eleanor Whitaker wasn't just the wealthiest client in their books, she was becoming a legend. Kayla and Tyler, now relegated to spectators in the grand shift, watched from afar. They had stopped whispering. Their mistakes had been acknowledged, but the weight of that first impression lingered. I just wish I could take it back, Kayla murmured, watching Eleanor meet with Margaret through the glass. You can't, Tyler replied, but maybe we can learn something from it. Meanwhile, upstairs in the executive suite, James Clayton was reviewing a report. It detailed Eleanor's full profile, a complete portfolio of private health investments, her founding of the Care Hope clinics, and her early funding of what became one of the largest health tech platforms in the country. Eleanor's name was nowhere on the board of directors. She never sought credit, only progress. The kicker? A separate report showed her charitable foundation had quietly paid off over $20 million in medical debt for low-income families across the Southeast. Margaret walked in mid-read. I think we've only scratched the surface of who she really is. James nodded. She's not just managing money, she's shaping the future. Downstairs, Eleanor met with the bank's compliance officer and trust attorney, going over details of her long-term goals. She requested automatic quarterly disbursements to a list of pre-approved nonprofit partners. She wanted quarterly performance summaries, but only one in print. I like to hold real paper, she told them. Helps me think. She declined the limo they offered her. She declined the custom client suite they tried to assign her. Instead, she asked for a simple pass that would let her enter and exit through the employee entrance. No need for spectacle, she said. I'm not interested in being gawked at. Margaret and James honored every wish. Later that week, the mayor of Charleston quietly reached out, asking to meet with Eleanor. She declined. A major private equity firm sent an offer to buy out one of her tech holdings. She ignored it. She wasn't here to be chased. She was here to set an example. On Friday morning, Eleanor returned to the same lobby where it had all started. She walked up to the same counter where Kayla now stood, straighter than ever, with a soft but respectful tone. Good morning, Ms. Whitaker. How can I help you today? Eleanor smiled. Just needed to cash a check. Kayla took it, $250, and processed it quickly. This time she didn't flinch. She didn't joke. She simply handed Eleanor the bills with both hands and said, "Thank you for banking with us." Eleanor tucked the cash into her purse and nodded. Now that's more like it. Word of Eleanor Whitaker's presence continued to ripple through Charleston. Not because she sought attention, but because her influence was impossible to ignore. In a city accustomed to old money and flashy newcomers, Eleanor was something else entirely. Quiet power in motion. She continued to visit the bank weekly, always dressed in her simple slacks and cardigan, always carrying the same worn leather tote. No personal assistant, no security detail. Just a notebook, her phone, and a calm, unwavering sense of purpose. Grand Harbor National had transformed. Customer service training was overhauled. A new protocol was established, the Whitaker Standard, designed to ensure every client, regardless of appearance or balance, was treated with dignity and respect. What started as damage control became a revolution in how they operated. Eleanor never asked for it, but she noticed. She noticed when Kayla greeted her with genuine warmth. She noticed when the elevator operator started saying, "Good morning, ma'am," instead of pretending she didn't exist. She noticed when James Clayton held the door for her, not out of obligation, but humility. Outside the bank, her efforts grew more visible. The first of her new scholarships for women in STEM rolled out at Charleston State. A mobile healthcare unit bearing no name, just a blue cross and the word care, was seen serving low-income neighborhoods. Then, in a move that stunned the entire board, Eleanor invited Margaret Levine to co-chair the new Whitaker Impact Trust, giving her full executive authority over its philanthropic arm. No other bank in the region could boast such a relationship. "This isn't a job," Eleanor said during the private meeting. "It's a responsibility. You listened when no one else did." Margaret was speechless. She had worked with billionaires before, but this felt different, like being entrusted with a legacy rather than just a balance sheet. At the next quarterly board meeting, Eleanor appeared as a guest speaker. The invitation had come weeks earlier, and no one was sure she'd accept. But she walked into that sleek conference hall with the same calm demeanor and stood before executives in $1,000 suits like she had nothing to prove. "I came here with $500 and a purpose," she began. "Some of you laughed, some of you judged. That's okay. I've been underestimated before. But what matters now is what we build together. Not for profit, but for people." The room fell silent. "Money is just a tool," she continued, "and I'm handing you a toolbox. Let's use it wisely." Applause followed. Genuine, deep applause. As she walked out of the room and into the elevator, a young intern, no more than 22, stepped in with her. He looked nervous but spoke. "Ms. Whitaker, can I just say, you've really inspired me." She looked over, smiled, and said, "Good. Now go do something with that." When the doors closed, Eleanor descended to the lobby. Just another woman with a purpose. And though the city would never fully grasp the depth of her impact, one thing was clear. They would never laugh at the woman withdrawing $500 again. She had become a force to be reckoned with, a quiet storm who changed everything, simply by walking in and demanding to be seen. And now everyone was watching. But most importantly, everyone was learning. Eleanor Whitaker's story is a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and respect should never be conditional. What began as a simple $500 withdrawal became a wake-up call to a whole institution, proving that dignity, humility, and quiet power can change not just policies, but people. Never underestimate someone based on how they look or what they ask for. Treat every person with respect. You never know who's about to rewrite the rules. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Greatness doesn't always come dressed for it.